Let's do some more sticky hands.
This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed.
So we have already looked a bit into the concepts of sticky hands, and I still keep that now as an unstructured type of introduction, but I want to emphasize some more aspects here. As I said in the last video about sticky hands gives you a opportunity to experiment with your techniques, and that is something that differs from the normal technical training. Because if you are training on a specific technique, then at a certain point your training partner knows what will happen, and he or she is then able to block that technique. That's what we often see when it comes to the so-called pressure testing stuff, that people actively block a technique and prohibit the execution of it. The problem behind this idea is if you know what's happening, then it's of course easy to do something against it. And flow sparring or sticky hands allows us to have a frame where we can experiment with techniques without the opponent or better training partner knowing what's coming. I usually approach the idea of pressure testing in training when people say, oh, this technique is not working, because I can go against it with exactly flow sparring aspects, because here in sticky hands, it's very simple. If I try to get into a technique and I feel pressure coming from the opponent, then I usually reverse the movement that I just started and go right the other way. The thing is, I will then not end up in the technique that I originally anticipated, but I will get something. And that's in fact a lot of the exercises, when you look at it in the curricula of Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do, that you would use specifically in Chisao, that you basically lure in the opponent by giving pressure in a certain direction, waiting for the pressure that will be put up against your initial pressure, and then work with this. This gives the term pressure testing a completely new meaning, because I don't know, I'm not native in English and maybe I don't get the subtle differences here, but pressure and pressure can mean quite different things. I suggest, if you are very, very keen on pressure testing, try to do this stuff from the sticky hands side. Maybe that opens your eyes about what technique is functional or non-functional. For people that train the classical type of sticky hands, I would always suggest try to get into the wrestling motions from that, with the wrist grabs or wrist locks then, and arm locks and entrances into throwing techniques. That gives a totally new perspective if you allow it. You can also use sticky hands, of course, for improving your reaction times if you go faster and faster. The problem with very fast sticky hands is that you build up tension again. And that's what I emphasized in the last video. The big advantage of this type of exercise is that it lowers the tension, and it can be effectively used exactly as that. After you have done an exercise that builds up a lot of tension, do this one, and then you can relax down. And if you then use it to build up tension again, it's somewhere lost. I see that often if you do, for example, one-handed sticky hands, that people really make out a point game. So, haha, I hit you 3 times and you only hit me once. That will build up tension also. And here it's really, really important to stay soft. If we look at some of the exercises that we see, for example, in Aikido, we could also think that this is very, very close to the flow sparring stuff or sticky hands, especially when you see changes from one wrist lock into the other. It heavily reminds me of what we see here. And we know that if you go back to Uyeshiba's old videos, if he would perform a technique, he would add up atemi, which means striking techniques, quite a bit, and then you are very, very close to what we are doing here, and it's fun to see that basically all these different martial arts come down to the same type of movements. But on the other hand, that's no surprise. We know biomechanics must be the same in all types of martial arts because they use the same type of system, the human body, and the human body can only react to incoming forces in a certain way. And yes, there's different emphases, but in my view, it's mostly different emphases for different training regimes, and it's probably the differences between the martial arts down to this that they emphasize different types of training regimes. In many cases, it's also, of course, about the certain curriculum of techniques that are available, but we have so many base movements that you can see in all the martial arts that the main difference and the main dispute, in my point of view, is probably exactly this type of training regime. And the training regime will differ on what you want, and it will also differ on your possibilities. If you are training with a young muscular male that is in the same range of weight as you are, you can often let hell break free. If you have differences in size, weight, or age, you often have to be more careful. And so it also heavily depends on your training group and your training partners and what they want, what you can do and how you can train. And that's just a matter of communication. And I think this is something that we always have to keep in mind. A lot of the dispute in martial arts, when people say, oh, that doesn't work, oh, that doesn't work, that mostly comes down to communication, because what does it mean? Where does it not work? And especially when it comes to the discussion with MMA, the main point is then this will not work in this type of competition. And that's then probably right. But that's always the question, is that the ultimate measure for something? Especially when looking at the historical martial arts, when it's about reconstructing stuff with weapons, I don't think MMA is the measure to be taken in. And a lot of the discussion is then about theories, about certain things, and often we lack the historical context where things come from. And of course, it's then always a bad habit to say, oh, this is a secret of the martial art. But in many cases, it's probably just we don't know. So why I'm ranting so much about that, it's about communication. And there we come back here to the sticky hands. Sticky hands is a very specific type of communication, not verbally, but by pressures, by pushing and pulling and being soft at the right spot and being strong at other spots. And this sometimes looks a bit like dancing. If you look at some styles, you really have the impression, oh, why has this guy now been flying to the ground? Yeah, because this is a type of exercise where you can also learn to be soft enough to follow a very subtle type of force in an over-exaggerated manner. That is not a fake thing. This is an exercise. And that's what people, I think, have to understand about flow sparring and sticky hands. I really enjoy this type of training, and although it's relaxed, if you recognize it after some time, it builds up core muscles quite a bit. We will further provide some videos about flow sparring and sticky hands to entertain you a bit, to inspire you a bit, and I hope to see you around next time.